Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, not disturbing anyone. But Jas was un-German. And so the self-important Hitler Youth leader marches up and orders them to stop this Jewish nonsense. But the Jasses stripped his clothes off, stuffed the most disgusting things into his mouth, I will not say what, and they chucked him in the river by the sewage outflow. The whole thing took no more than a few minutes.
The government hit back. Curfews were ordered to stop young people visiting bars after 9 o'clock. Hanging round and smoking in public were banned. Forced labor for those that broke the rules, or death. This photo shows the fate of 12 young Edelweiss pirates caught in Cologne in '44. The ideal child, raised by proud Nazi parents, was of quite another mold. For one thing, young men and young women had different parts to play. As a leader of the Girls' League put it,
men and women, boys and girls, must carry out their duty according to their station. Boys we raise as political soldiers, and girls as the comrades of these political soldiers. We teach them to be wives and mothers, and to breed the next generation. That's all.
Kinder, Kirche, Küche. Children, church, and kitchen. Girls in Nazi Germany weren't encouraged to have ambitions beyond the home. In the Girls' League, they learned cooking, making beds, childcare. Their clothes and hair copied old peasant style. A perm could be punished by shaving the head. Boys, meanwhile, were being bred for war. These scenes record life on a typical Hitler Youth summer camp. The camps were the high point of the and they were much loved. They gave poor children the chance of a holiday, sometimes for the first time. They mixed rich and poor together. They introduced city kids to the countryside. But their main function was basic military training.
We learned how to throw hand grenades, how to dig trenches. Then they take us on long, hard marches to toughen us up. If anyone fell, they'd shout till they wobbled onto their feet again. They would divide us into two groups, the blues and the reds. One group to defend a position, the other to attack it. The whistle, and then contact. Noise, bloody noses, twisted arms, shrieks of pain. In the beginning, I hated it all, but I got used to it. And I think what it did was it developed the aggression we would all need to help Germany fight a war.
Some historians argue Hitler wanted war from the start. The way he delighted Germans by snubbing the Treaty of Versailles, rearming and reclaiming peacefully land lost to Germany in 1919. The Saar, the Rhineland, Austria in 1938, and the Sudetenland in western Czechoslovakia. But then, in March 1939, the rest of Czechoslovakia fell.
Once again, the rattle of a German army on the march echoes in Europe. Where that march may end, no man can foretell, least of all the man who gave the order.
Czechoslovakia wasn't conquered to unify German-speaking people. This was invasion, pure and simple. The first of many invasions to create Lebensraum, living space, for Hitler's master race. And suddenly the purpose of all that youth indoctrination was clear. In just 6 years, Hitler had turned boys like Henry into soldiers strong enough and committed enough to wage a war of aggression.
My father felt that the only cause worth fighting for was peace. He had fought in the First World War. To him, it had been a senseless slaughter of millions of young men. And he felt it almost a holy duty to save me from experiencing such horror. But no, I didn't see it like that at all. And if I was to die on a battlefield, well, that would be glorious, protecting my mother and father from our enemies. Such a death would be tremendous.
September 1939, Poland. German aggression kickstarts the Second World War.
When it finally came, it was almost a relief. The air clearing after so much uncertainty. Our future was now in the open. Hitler himself said as much. And we believed our Führer with all our hearts, and we were prepared to follow him to the end of the world.
Henry Mettelmann himself was drafted in 1941. Few in his company of 200 men were over 20 years old, and all were ex-Hitler youth. They saw their journey east as a great adventure. But the reality of war on the Russian front was somewhat different. This was perhaps the most brutal battle zone of the Second World War. Nine out of every 10 German casualties fell here.
My father died just before we left. On his deathbed, he told me, remember, the enemy soldiers you'll be fighting will be just working men like you. Force-fed the same slogans, fooled into the same false dreams. I just humored him. Later I came to realize the truth of his words.
For 11 years now, drunkenness on a scale beyond measuring, which will be followed by the most horrible hangover the world has ever known.
This is the story of the German opposition to Hitler, as recorded in the diary of the writer and lawyer Fritz Reck Malletzhaven.
They're drunk on propaganda. Even on the point of defeat, the German people are so drugged they hail this maniac Hitler like a herd of mooing cattle.
The date, July 1944. The Second World War has a year to run, but already it's clear Germany is losing. Every day and every night, Allied bombs rain down on German cities. German armies are in retreat on every front, and yet still Hitler clings to power. For those, like Fritz Reck, who loathed the Nazis, it was a time of shame.
Even here, far from Munich, the pressure from the bombing shatters windows. On the roads, streams of refugees, old women with bundles on their backs. In their eyes, you see the horror of the firestorms. But why should Herr Hitler worry? We hear he spends his time reading novels, watching movies, bullying his generals. And meanwhile, every day, his shelter is dug deeper and deeper into the earth.
Reck's dream was that one day the German people would see their mistake and defeat Nazism from within. But time was running out. For 11 long and lonely years, he'd watched the opposition fail to make any impact on the German people. But why did they fail?
Terror is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people harder than a fear of sudden death.
(1933). Hitler destroys all organized political opposition. The Communist and Social Democratic parties banned. The trade unions which spoke up for workers banned. Their leaders beaten up, arrested, imprisoned in concentration camps. At a stroke, Hitler had made powerless those men and women most likely to lead protest against him. Those that escaped arrest were now illegals, outlaws.
We were in constant danger. We couldn't go to the law. There was no law. What could we do? Move to another part of the country where no one knew us? Live under false names and false papers? Some did. Others just gave up.
In the circumstances, it's amazing how much political resistance survived. In 1936, according to police statistics, over 1,000 anti-Nazi groups were still at work, writing reports on the public mood, printing anti-Nazi leaflets, all disguised with false covers to make them easier to hide, as cake recipes, seed packets, camera instruction manuals. The Gestapo counted 1.5 million such anti-Nazi leaflets doing the rounds. But the resistance was divided. The Social Democrats didn't trust the Communists. And as the secret police drew the net ever closer, the fight became more and more hopeless.
Can we seriously harm the Nazis, fly posting, or painting slogans on walls, or stealing and hiding a gun or two? Does it change enough to make the risk worthwhile? People think it's romantic to battle with the Gestapo, but it's not. It's suicidal.
Fritz Reck never actively resisted, but writing a diary was treason enough, keeping an ear to the ground on his country estate, recording the public mood.
Again and again, my friends warn me about my writings. I ignore them. I must record what's happening here in Germany. And so, night after night, I hide this diary deep in the woods, always alert in case I'm seen, always changing my hiding place. Do you have any idea what it's like to live like this? No human rights, always under threat that someone might turn you in at any time. And this total, desperate lack of opposition. It's that more than anything that makes our life here so unbearable.
At most, all those like Reck could do was lodge a quiet protest. There were ways. The Nazis wanted conformity, everyone doing the same, flying the flag, saluting, using the correct Nazi greeting.
Heil Hitler! Heil Hitler!
Heil Hitler!
By breaking the rules,
Heil Hitler, Professor.
Grüß Gott, Frau Trutz.
you could quite spoil a Nazi's day. Or equally dangerous, there were Nazi charities like Winter Relief. Refusing to give could result in arrest, but people took the risk.
Heil Hitler!
Shoo!
And then there was humor. This innocent-looking brown shirt songbook disguised a gag sheet. Joke after joke at the Nazis' expense.
A man with an achy tooth went to a dentist. The dentist said, "Open your mouth." The man said, "Open my mouth? In front of a stranger? You must be joking."
But as Fritz Reck noted in his diary, the government was hardly likely to be brought down by joke books.
I think we'd rather see resistance take the form of armed rebellion. But that's the problem. The Nazis have made us so sluggish, a nation of cowards.
Reck was a Christian. His opposition to the Nazis was less political than religious. He feared the Nazis meant to destroy Christianity. He was right. They were busy inventing their own religion, not one that protected the weak, but one that admired strength.
Adolf Hitler.
I saw a Hitler Youth boy recently. He was in a classroom and suddenly he noticed a crucifix hanging behind the teacher's desk. And his face twisted in fury, and he ripped down this symbol, which hangs in every church in Germany, and he threw it to the ground with the cry, "Lie there, you dirty Jew."
The Christian churches might have led ordinary Germans against the Nazis, but like the outlawed political parties, they failed. Hitler had made idle promises that he'd protect the church. The Pope, the Catholic bishops, and German Protestant leaders all chose to believe him.
You see, we Germans have been rooted in Christianity for centuries. If the churches had pulled together, if the bishops hadn't compromised, many of us felt that there would have been a popular uprising. Some sort of rebellion. I'm sure of it, yes.
Some did what they could. Martin Niemöller spent 8 years in prison for preaching anti-Nazi sermons. But as he reflected in a poem in 1945, more common were those Christians that just stood by.
When the Nazis came for the communists, I was silent. I wasn't a communist. When the Nazis came for the Social Democrats, I was silent. I wasn't a Social Democrat. When the Nazis came for the trade unionists, I was silent. I wasn't a trade unionist. When the Nazis came for the Jews, I was silent. I wasn't a Jew. When the Nazis came for me, there was no one left to protest.
September 1939, war. Fritz Reck receives a letter.
Reck, you won't believe it. We are the children of the gods. I'm just back from the Battle of Poland. 11 flying missions, dive bombing, columns of troops and troop trains. It's such a wonderful carnage. I love this war. We're so utterly without pity.
A letter written by an escaped convict? No. This letter was written by a young man with bright blue eyes and an irresistible boyish laugh. In civilian life, he was entirely harmless. You see, we can't see the shame anymore. Germany is so completely drugged on its own lies, and the cure will be more terrible than anything seen before in history.
The war changed everything. Now resistance was treason, but also now there was more reason to resist. Germany was no longer just killing her own, but committing unspeakable atrocities abroad.
I spoke with a man. I'll call him just H. back from the Eastern Front, and he saw a massacre. 30,000 Jews slaughtered in 1 hour. And when they ran out of machine gun bullets, they used flamethrowers, and people came to watch from all over the city. Off-duty troops, young, fresh-faced fellows. Oh, the degradation.
Did people back home in Germany know what was being done in their name? After the war, ordinary Germans gave conflicting accounts of what was or was not known.
We had problems of our own. The war, the day-to-day, grabbed us like a prisoner. If we heard rumors, it was a very distant thing.
They were called work camps. That's what we thought they were for. And I used to think, good. It'll be the first honest day's work they've done in their lives.
They were secret. They kept the camps secret, otherwise there would have been a protest. That was why they kept them secret. We didn't know nothing.
Everyone knew. The Gassings, everything. They can't say otherwise. People made jokes about it. We had this cheap soap. It floated on water. People said it was made from the Jews.
Why did no one speak out? Because the horror stopped people's mouths. If you spoke out, you went to a camp yourself.
Hans Scholl was one of those few exceptional Germans brave enough to take the risk. The only pictures that survive show him as a young student at Munich University. It was there he'd learned to hate Nazism, how it crushed individual freedom. In 1942, with a small group of student friends, he began to print leaflets in secret. They called themselves the White Rose, white for purity.
We will not be silenced. We are your bad conscience. The White Rose will not leave you in peace.
At first, Hans's sister Sophie was angry, terrified that he should run such a risk. But she too loathed the Nazis. The way, for instance, the local party boss, Paul Giesler, had urged the girl students to bear a child for Hitler.
One a year. That's what we want. Preferably a boy. It's pretty automatic once you're in the swing of it, and if you're too charmless to find a mate, I'll lend you one of my officers.
For Hans and Sophie, it spurred them on to more opposition. Another 5 leaflets, printed in bulk and taken by train for posting in towns across Germany. The aim was to spread the word.
In the name of the German people, we demand of Hitler the return of our most valuable possession, freedom.
Who's it come from?
A leaflet of the resistance movement in Germany.
How did they get our address?
I don't know. From the phone book, it doesn't matter.
Burn it! You must burn it! It mustn't be found in the house.
I will burn it. But first, I'm going to read it.
On February the 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie were spotted in the empty university, showering leaflets down the central stairwell. They'd known the risks. Sophie had said just days before,
So many people have died for this regime. It's time someone died against it.
they were arrested, tried, and beheaded for high treason.
I never saw these 2 young people. I heard only bits and pieces of the story broadcast from London. But the importance of what I heard, I could hardly believe it.
Mrs. the BBC Home and Forces programme.
The Scholls are the first in Germany with the courage to speak out for the truth. One day we must all make a pilgrimage to their graves and stand before them, ashamed.
The aircraft of the Coastal and Bomber Commands have carried out day and night attacks on the port of Brest and on enemy shipping there.
1943 was the war's turning point. The German army was retreating in Russia and Africa, and the carpet bombing of German cities had begun. Propaganda Minister Goebbels talked of a new kind of war demanding total sacrifice. Would Germany fight total war? But in reality, the Nazis were slowly losing control, and the atmosphere shifted accordingly.
Suddenly, people walk straighter, their faces shine. Everyone senses a ghostly hand has nailed the Nazis' death warrant to the wall. And what do we find? Petty party officials sniffing which way the wind's blowing, saying Gruß Gott again instead of Heil Hitler. Nazi school teachers back in church. The swastika disappearing from coat lapels. The women's leader quietening down.
The Nazis were running scared, but also the harsh realities of war, rationing, bombing, were puncturing Nazi confidence. Grumbling became more common, black humor at Hitler's expense, and at last, some active resistance. Reck's diary mentions army deserters sabotaging the war machine. But the government hadn't given up. This was total war, and the Nazis were punch-drunk on terror.
5-minute trials are enough. They stamp on the verdict, liquidate and expropriate. Kill, then seize all property. The victim shoved out a back door where the guillotine stands waiting, and in university medical schools, the corpses are piling up so high in the dissecting rooms they've refused all further shipments.
And still the war dragged on, week after week, with every week another 30,000 murders in the death camps. Only Hitler's death would stop the madness, but he was like a fox gone to earth. As Reck had so despairingly put it,
why should Herr Hitler worry? Every day his shelter is dug deeper and deeper into the earth.
Reck wrote those words on July the 18th, 1944. 3 days earlier, this photo had been taken. Hitler with one of his generals, and standing beside them, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. On July 20th, Stauffenberg put a bomb in a briefcase under a map table just a few feet from Hitler. Then, with the fuse set at 10 minutes, he left the room and flew to Berlin, where a full army rebellion was ready and waiting. But the bomb plot failed. Hitler, shielded by the wooden leg of the map table, survived the blast.
God guarded and protected the Führer. God did not desert Germany in its fateful hour.
In the wave of terror that followed the bomb plot, another 5,000 Germans lost their lives. Some were strung up on butcher's hooks to prolong their agony. And Hitler, it was said, liked to watch the execution footage over and over again. Fritz Reck was himself arrested in October '44. We don't know exactly what he did. The official charge said he undermined army morale. He died in Dachau concentration camp. A Genickschuss, a shot in the neck.
You, up there.